Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
Here we are outside of the Opa-Lockya City Hall, located at 777 Scheherazade Boulevard. 777, an interesting number, numerologically speaking, Kabbalistically speaking, and of course you have the jackpot, 777. And you know, they got to come up with these numbers when they were planning the city, so these were not assigned, these were planned numbers in accordance with the buildings, because they were designing the whole city from scratch, you gotta remember. Originally, this city hall had a white coat of paint, but today it has kind of a dilapidated cream color, and I think it's been painted darker intentionally since then. But originally, with its white, it would have been glorious to look at. Now, you may be thinking, from afar, it kind of looks like cheap building materials. Well, as we're going to look at it in a sec, that's not the case whatsoever. This is probably one of the sturdiest buildings in Florida, believe it or not. Here we are coming around the side of the Opa-Lockya City Hall, and you can see at the corner right there how much stone is jutting out. That's just raw coquina rock. And you might be thinking that looks like plaster or stucco, and the exterior is, but you're going to see in a second what the majority of the building here is actually made of, and I actually had no idea until I went there and checked for myself. I found no information online as to what this building was made out of. You can see the domes from afar there, the minarets. Most of the minarets have fallen apart. Only one of them, with that strange Antiquitech apparatus, is still standing today. And I'm making kind of a 360 around the building here. We're going to go inside in a second. You can see the top has fallen off of most of the minarets. We're approaching the other side here now. And you're going to get a glimpse of the building material here in a sec. I don't want to spoil it. But you know, this was really a big shock for me because I was kind of worried. What would this be made of? Because some of the other buildings they try and say are just wood and stucco. Well, this, right there we have solid blocks. But I still couldn't see exactly what it was. But I knew it was solid, very solid. You can see the windows have been patched up there. And if I didn't say it before, if you can't tell, this has been abandoned for years. Opa-Lockya has been in bad shape for years now. It's one of the worst off cities in Florida. In America, actually, crime-wise, poverty-wise, corruption-wise. And I don't think that's any coincidence either. I think they did kind of try and sweep this city under the rug. And a lot of crime and drugs and degeneracy will erase a lot more history than you would think. Well, As I approach here, you can probably tell this building is largely made of solid brick and coquina rock. And I was surprised that this information was not included in the Wikipedia or any online files that I could find. And very strange choice architecturally to have the coquina rock mixed in with the brick like this, very seamlessly and pretty masterfully, if I may say. You have piled up coquina rock, and that is solid. This explains why this building has stood through all the hurricanes that have came through this state in the last 100 years just about. There's a good zoom in on quote-unquote Antiquitech. Definitely some type of lightning apparatus, metallic. Now we're at the other side of the entrance. Still not inside, but we're about to be. And you can see on this side as well, the coquina rock built in with the brick. And with this terrible coating, you'd never even know what this building is made of. You would just think it's just a cruddy old, tacky, themed, put together temporary building almost. That's kind of how they make it look, with the tacky design on the outside. But this is a solid brick and solid coquina structure. Now that little gazebo right there, believe it or not, is the top of the tower. The main tower up there. For those curious, these pictures of Arabic-looking people in and around the city hall, dressed in Arabic and Islamic clothing. This city and its buildings were actually used for sets for various photo shoots and movies, films, but at various times, Glenn Curtis himself actually would throw parties here, costume parties, where everyone would dress up as sheiks and sharifs, and they'd wear turbans and such. So as I mentioned, this city hall is actually abandoned. So what we found here was pretty eerie, to say the least. My girlfriend went in, I did not, and what she found was a fruit offering. This was left here by someone for, I would assume, spiritual purposes, maybe some type of voodoo, hoodoo. There is a lot of that going on in the Miami area. And of course, I'm not saying it's inherently evil. I think it's actually pretty nice. Things like that. Fruit offerings. I don't think there's any negative interpretation there. In this corner here, you can see just how masterfully this coquina rock has been mixed in with the solid brick archwork. All these arches are solid brick. They have this disgusting coating on top of them, but as I said, a solid brick building. Those arches right there, you see how they once had vines all over them. It's pretty sad how this city hall is just left to rot, when it could easily stand for another 100 years. Easily. If it were left in the right hands, absolutely.
Opa-Locka is a very unusual suburb of Miami. Founded in 1925 by controversial inventor Glenn Curtis. Now, who is Glenn Curtis, and why is he often listed as one of the most influential men in American history? Well, perhaps the better question is, why on earth did the inventor of some of the earliest planes and motorcycles decide to drop everything and move to a secluded area of South Florida and build an entire city from scratch. A city unlike any other in the world, a city designed in a completely alien style. Opa-Locka, Florida is the largest collection of Moorish revival architecture in the Western Hemisphere. This begs the question, was this city founded or found? It will be shown in this video that Curtis was likely not the developer of this town, but the Moors themselves who brought Moorish architecture to Florida. Glenn Curtis came to prominence in the early 1900s by adapting a V8 engine to motorcycles and breaking multiple land speed records. He would then go on to adapt gas engines for airships, blimps, and zeppelins. Curtis always seemed to invent and revolutionize wherever he went. At his first job ever, at what would later become Kodak photography, he invented both a stencil machine and a type of camera, with no prior experience or education to go off of. However, in 1907, he was approached by Alexander Graham Bell, the false inventor of the telephone, and offered a career in aeroplanes. I'm no engineer or physicist, but I would say that this is quite a jump, especially for a motorcyclist with only a middle school education. In an effort to understand Curtis, let's take a deeper look at Bell.
The man credited with the invention of the telephone is Alexander Graham Bell. However, it's not as straightforward as that, as many other inventors were involved in the discovery process. Now, it's true that Bell was the first person to come up with the most practical design of the telephone and patent it, but other inventors such as Elisha Gray and Antonio Meucci were actually the first people with the idea of a handheld communications device. There's a lot of controversy around this topic, and that's because Italian immigrant Antonio Meucci began the process of developing the telephone's design in 1849, which is 27 years before Bell was credited with the invention. But alongside Meucci, there was another man. College professor Elisha Gray actually announced he had invented the telephone's design on the same day as Bell. Neither man attended the office where the patents were arranged. Their lawyers did. Historical reports suggest on February 14, 1876, Bell's lawyer reached the office first and was therefore awarded the patent for the design. However, there are counterclaims which suggest there was some wrongdoing by individuals, and possibly Bell himself, in the patent office to ensure that he was handed the patent. In 2002, though, Meucci was recognized by the U.S. Congress as the telephone's inventor instead of Bell, 113 years after his death. The House of Representatives' decision encouraged claims in Italy that Bell, a wealthy Scottish man, had only found his fame and fortune through the theft of Meucci's work.
Despite having no prior experience in aeronautics, Curtis was immediately thrust to the forefront of the blossoming airplane industry. He was, in fact, in direct competition with the Wright brothers. Bell and Curtis actually had a couple things in common: plagiarism and fraud. Many historians believe that Glenn Curtis attempted to take credit for the Wrights' advancements in aeroplane development. He was defeated in a series of court cases by the Wright brothers, which led to another serious scandal. In 1914, Curtis conspired with various members of the Smithsonian to discredit the Wright brothers' claim to the first flight, usurping the rights with a former head of the Smithsonian, Samuel Langley. This cover-up is well documented and is one of the Smithsonian's most embarrassing scandals, but certainly not their last. The fraud was not rectified until 1928. But hey, that's okay. Everyone deserves a third chance, and what do you do when you've scammed and frauded your way to disgrace? You pack up and move to Florida. Back to Opa-Locka. It's rather odd that a man embroiled in scandal, who seemed to eat, breathe, and sleep nothing but engines, would drop everything to develop an entire Moorish-themed city, complete with 80 Moorish revival buildings and facilities, all accomplished in a year. In fact, they try to claim that Opa-Locka was modeled after an imaginary representation of the Arabian Nights. What's even odder is that Curtis did not just develop one town in the area, but 3 separate neighboring towns. Starting in 1921 with Hialeah, Florida, he then allegedly went on to develop Miami Springs, and lastly his magnum opus, Opa-Locka, in 1925. It all came crashing down, however, when the Great Hurricane of 1926 devastated the Miami area. Of the 80 or so buildings in Opa-Locka, only 20 survived. The same level of destruction was seen in Hialeah and Miami Springs. Did Glenn Curtis not know when hurricane season was, or even what a hurricane was? It's pretty confusing that somebody would so impulsively build such a susceptible city. Rather conveniently, Glenn Curtis's personal mansion in the Opa-Locka's centerpiece City Hall miraculously survived. It's also worth noting that these buildings have survived every single subsequent hurricane since 1926, so it's safe to say these structures are decently hurricane-proof. What made the 1926 hurricane so special? Curtis must have been facing a lot of questions before his untimely death in 1930. He died suddenly while in court, ironically, of appendicitis. Perhaps he was a loose end in an already hard-to-believe narrative. Allow me to give a more plausible, old-world explanation of these events. Curtis was never really an inventor. He was merely another inheritor. One of the men entrusted with adapting the technologies of the quote-unquote Tartarian hydroelectric grid into the Rockefeller-controlled internal combustion energy model. This is pretty evident, considering he literally just took existing concepts and slapped gasoline engines on them. His true accomplishment was forever intertwining vehicular innovation with energy dependency. To summarize, at one point not so long ago, energy and technology were free, for lack of a better word. But the industrialists took over and made it scarce and expensive. Gas engines adapted by Curtis played a massive role in this. Regardless of your position on Tartaria or Atlantis, this holds true. Curtis was tasked by Bell with one cover-up, but began taking too much heat, and was then removed from the public's eye and tasked with another cover-up, erasing all traces of the Moors and Tartaria from Florida. This had already been achieved in many urban areas, but areas like Opa-Locka were not under firm control, and many Seminole Indians lived there before Curtis arrived. Opa-Locka is a Seminole name. If you haven't watched my video on the Seminoles, you might be a little behind on this, but bear with me. The Seminoles, who dress like no other Native Americans, are undoubtedly of Moorish or Celtic ancestry. Seminole has the same root as Semitic, meaning Hebrew or Mediterranean. The Seminoles are descended from the Muskogee tribe, from the same root as Moscow, and thus the St. Petersburg, Florida, and the St. Petersburg, Russia. When explorers arrived, they found what looked like Muslim-influenced Russian Orthodox architecture in Florida, an undeniable Tartarian connection. After getting to Florida and claiming to invent the airboat, of course, Curtis would begin either destroying pre-existing structures or remodeling them with the intent of westernizing them just enough to be integrated more smoothly with the European people populating Florida. These tourists had no idea they were facilitating archaeological cover-ups. They were just buying neat vacation homes. The 1926 hurricane would be the perfect storm for Curtis's mission. To put it plainly, I am of the opinion that he was demolishing structures and blamed it on the hurricane. Before we wrap up, let's understand some of the terminology that is used in this presentation. The Moors, also known as Berbers, come from the areas around Morocco. This region of North Africa was also referred to as Barbary at various points in history. Tartaria is often the name given to all traces of Old World architecture and technology. It is a bit of a misnomer, but one that I embrace. Tartaria today is a region in and around Russia. Barbar and Tartar are the same word. One simply denotes the people west of the Roman Empire, and the other those east of the Roman Empire. So, to summarize, Tartaria lied east of Rome, and Barbary lied west. This explains why both Germanic and North African peoples are barbarians, and both the Chinese and Russian are Tartarians, from the Roman perspective. Let's not waste energy trying to cement these ambiguous misnomers onto specific groups of people who likely did a lot of migrating and called themselves something completely different. An interesting side note, leading up to World War I, Curtis pioneered the use of airplanes in combat, resulting in the complete obsolescence of all static forts on the entire planet, especially star forts.
Glenn Curtis was also allegedly responsible for the first ever automobile plane, called the Curtis Autoplane. Here we have what used to be the Opa-Lockya train station. But interestingly, this was also a hub for air travel, such as airships. The word moor actually means to dock or land an airship, as well as boats. It's the same terminology. But to moor a zeppelin or a dirigible is to land it or fasten it down. So, is it any coincidence that Glenn Curtis, a pioneer of American airships, would create an entire city made of Moorish architecture that was once habited by a Moorish-looking people? Here we have the Graf Zeppelin from Germany in Florida with its infamous insignia. And right there we have a picture of a Zeppelin coming down next to the Miami Springs Sanatorium. Here we have a picture of Glenn Curtis golfing with some Seminoles. Not sure what the point of this was, or why that gentleman has his bow with him, but clearly just some type of photo op. The fact that the Graf Zeppelin would land at Opa-Locka, Florida, is not the only connection this area has to Germany. The Florida Seminole flag is nearly identical to the modern German flag. In addition to that, we have the old Scandia brand of what I assume is cigarettes, being headquartered in Opa-Locka, Florida. Nearby, we have a city named Dania Beach, Florida, named for a Danish colony and its Danish settlers, or perhaps the tribe of Dan. Right here we have what used to be the fire station, believe it or not.